Okay, thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Joining me today is Dr. Michael Rich, who is a Boston children's physician, as well as a researcher and a teacher at Harvard Med School, and an expert on cell phones and children. So that in and of itself is a very popular topic to discuss. Dr. Rich, thank you. First, can you just tell us about your work? Like you see patients and also you do all of this wonderful research.
Well, I am known colloquially as the Mediatrician, because I have for 30 years been studying the effects of the screens kids use and how they use them on their physical, mental, and social health. So what we do on a day-to-day basis is that I run something called the Digital Wellness Lab, which is a group of scientists who are looking at this interface between screens in kids' lives and their health and development. I also run the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders, which is, as far as I know, still the only academic medical center clinical program that really looks at those kids who've gotten into real trouble, going down the rabbit holes of gaming, of social media, of what we call information binging, which is endless YouTube, et cetera. And to the point that it's impaired their lives. They've lost sleep because they stay up all night because there's always something going on 24/7. And they don't go to school, they lose academics, and some of them get into real trouble, emotional trouble, to the point of self-harming and suicide even. So it's a serious issue for some kids. But the reality is the way kids use screens in their lives now, we have to be very sensitive and cognizant of. And that is that, unlike the days of television where you could have screen time limits because you knew what time the show started, what time the show ended, we now use screens entirely differently. We move in and out of them seamlessly, not just the kids, but all of us. So effectively, screen time is not something that can be measured in total. There are measurements of how long you're using certain devices for certain things, but we don't use them in a timely way. We use them in a completely flexible way. So one of the things that we really focus on is how they are using these screens. What content are they accessing? And what is the context in which they are using them? Something that is perfectly fine, looking up some research in the middle of the afternoon when you don't have other commitments, is one thing, but doing it at the dinner table or in the middle of the night is a whole different thing.
And
So
cool.
Exactly. So we are looking at how these devices and the way kids use them fit into their lives, and also guiding them toward positive uses, not just defending against negative ones, but ones that are measurable, and relate to their health rather than what's right and wrong. This is not about moral panic. This is about helping kids be healthy, smart, and kind to each other.
And why don't you show us your book before I ask you about schools, which is something I really want to talk to you about.
Okay, yes. The Mediatrician's Guide, a joyful approach to raising healthy, smart, kind kids in a screen-saturated world. And healthy and smart are good, but kind is the one missing thing in a lot of programs that are out there. We have to really learn how to be good citizens and good humans in this space.
Talk to me about, you and I had a conversation last week for a story about back to school. All kids in Massachusetts are back to school now. Many started 2 weeks ago, some just started last week. You have done research specifically on the benefits or detriments of kids having phones in schools. Give us the big picture, bird's eye view of what that research revealed.
Well, for one thing, I really hate the word ban, because I think we all reflexively push back against something that is banned from us. It makes it the forbidden fruit. It makes it something all the more attractive, especially to adolescents.
Mm.
Um, but what we approach this issue as how we can optimize the educational opportunity that school presents. There are two really important pillars of learning in school. The first is the didactic learning of math and science and literature and the arts. for which the young people need to pay attention and be present, both of which having a smartphone available undermines. I've had many high school teachers talk about how their students in class are randomly smiling at their knees, right? Because they've got under the desk, they've got that smartphone going. So it serves as a distraction from that didactic learning. The other key learning in school, particularly in elementary school, where their didactic learning is of things they will frankly never use in their adult life, other than, the basics of reading and arithmetic, is the social emotional learning that occurs in school. This is the first opportunity children have to be an individual in a society of their own making, where they can decide whether to engage in a challenge or not, whether that's an emotional challenge or an academic challenge, where they learn to deal with failure and overcome it and deal with challenges, decide who they like and who they don't like and how they express that and how they work it out. If they have a smartphone in their pocket, where mom or dad is saying, "How'd you do on that quiz? Do I need to talk to your teacher? How is that kid still bullying you in the playground?" Etc. Like Pinocchio sitting, on, like Jiminy Cricket sitting on Pinocchio's shoulder, right? Right. They don't get that experience. They don't get the opportunity to work these things out for themselves. Yes, they're troublesome. They are painful at times, and they will make mistakes. But frankly, I never learned much from what I did right the first time. What I learned from and what they will learn from is what the mistakes they make and how they correct them. We are all human, and that is a big part of the learning is how do we live in this world with each other? How do we become the person that we want to be? So I think that in both of those cases, smartphones disrupt the learnings that is necessary. I think,
And
though, sorry, I just want to say
no,
one
go
other
ahead, go
thing.
ahead.
I want to put in one place where I think smartphones have a role, and that
Okay.
is I think that schools need to include the use of smartphones in their media and digital literacy teaching. They need to be overt about, here's how you use this very powerful tool. In fact, that is a computer more than 1 million times faster and more powerful than what landed Apollo 11 on the moon. How do we use it well? How do we use it to be well in a healthy sense? And how do we know when to turn it off when it's not the best tool for the job?
Hmm.
So I
Give you
interrupted
space
you.
for those phones. No, you're fine.
Yes, yes.
We have just a couple minutes before we take a break and bring you back. So I just want to
Okay.
ask, when you come to these results that really tell you, maybe other than media literacy classes, phones don't have a positive place in schools for our kids. What does the research look like? Like, how are you learning that?
We're learning it from academic output of the kids. We are learning it from the fact that kids are more fatigued because they're staying up way late at night with their phones. They are more anxious and they're more distracted than they were even a few years ago when smartphones hadn't so deeply penetrated into childhood.
Mhm.
So I think that one of the things that we are realizing too is we are hearing from the kids the things that are their pain points. I wish I had more friends. I wish I had more time to play with people. I wish I, got along better with, other people at school and even my family.
Mhm. Mhm. And is there any benefit besides those media literacy classes to having a phone at school? Are there exceptions, I should say?
Well, one of the things we hear from the kids is that what they miss when they don't have a smartphone is the ability to know the schedule for the day.
Mm.
And we actually heard from kids at a school. We were just in Utah spending a whole day with a school that had just stopped having smartphones in the school at all. And many of them pushed back and said, "Can we have flip phones?" flip phones would give us all that we need, which is the schedule, the ability to text, even though it's clumsier, and the ability to have voice communication. So I think this is, a work in progress. We're figuring
Okay.
this out, how it goes along. But the interesting thing is we were getting really important information from the kids themselves about how they are using them, how it's fitting into their life, and how we can solve the problems together.
Okay. I'm going to ask you more about the trip to Utah after we take a really quick break. Okay, we're back with Dr. Rich. You were just telling us that you got back from a trip from Utah where you were helping implement a phone-free zone in a school district. How were you received? What kind of pushback, if any, did you get?
We were surprisingly well received by the kids because I figured they would be the greatest, pushback. And we actually spent the school day, doing workshops with kids in grades 5 through 12. We spent after school time with the entire faculty, and we spent the evening with their parents, because the idea was, when you have a huge sea change like this in a community, can we get all the strata of that community talking to each other? So it's not a one-off where we're just teaching them something and leaving town, but we are in fact starting what we hope to be a chain reaction and an ongoing discussion, because frankly, our relationship with screens and the devices that we have is a work in progress. It will
Mhm.
always be a work in progress. And we need to accept that we will be working at it. We will never be perfect at it. We will just keep going, right? And keep paying attention to the best we can be. So that being said, the kids had some concerns about not having phones, but in the large part, they said, it's really cool that no one has phones because we're talking to each other. Um,
Right, there's no longer the haves and the have-nots in that situation.
exactly. There's that. And the faculty saying you'd be amazed at how quiet lunchroom was when they had phones and how noisy it is now. Because they're interacting, they're having fun with each other. They're really connecting in deep and sustaining ways with each other. One of the things that we found in our research broadly around phones is that even though they give us near infinite connectivity, we can be connecting with anyone, anywhere in the world at any time of day. We actually use them in ways that undermines our deep and sustaining connectedness with each other, because we are using them to connect with people instead of more intimate, admittedly risky ways, like being face to face and being able to see someone's reaction when we say something that we think is a joke but is hurtful to them.
Right.
So the thing that really got them going in a positive way is we get to make friends. We get to spend time with our friends. We get to be silly instead of searching for the perfect meme, right? We get to just be spontaneous. And so we were very surprised in a very positive way that the kids um, really embraced it. And I think the biggest concern at both ends of the spectrum came from the parents. There were parents who were saying, the phones are a problem. I'm so glad you're here to help get them out of our kids' lives. But there were other parents who were sort of saying, I wish I want to be in touch with my kid all the time. Um,
Walking me into the question I have to ask you, and I asked you this last time we spoke as well. Unfortunately, school safety, school shootings is a problem in the US. There was just a major one in Georgia last week. You always hear those stories in those moments of a kid texting or calling his mom and saying, "Mom, there's a school shooter. Oh my God." Are parents concerned about that safety element? And if so, how do you respond to that?
well, parents are concerned about that safety element, in part because the wireless companies are pushing that either implicitly or explicitly as a marketing
Okay.
tool, right? There is no evidence that having phones in schools does anything to prevent the school shootings. or to protect them when they have a school shooting. There are systems in place, and there could be way better systems in place for schools to respond to a school shooting, but also to communicate to the parents what's going on and what they can do about it. The evidence that has come out from these situations is quite interesting, and we do have some very fresh evidence from the Georgia shooting, of reports that the kids were so busy communicating on their phones that they were not following their safety precautions, their safety moves as well as quickly as they should. In other words, instead of sheltering, they were texting or they were videoing or whatever. So there is a concern of that slowdown in their response, to which actually one of the ways that we think that technology could be used in this case is for them to have, as part of their student ID or something that is attached to them, essentially a panic button where they could
Like,
send out the data. They could send out the information that something bad is going down, and they could do it while taking shelter, while doing all the things they need to do to make themselves and each other safe. But we would add another button to this thing, which would be so they can communicate to their parents that they're okay after the fact. Because
okay,
that's the other thing that we've seen with school shootings and other big events like this, is that the network gets clogged and stopped. It gets paralyzed because so much data is coming out so quickly, that it just basically,
almost fails.
it fails, right? Because there's just too much happening. Video is very, very data heavy. This kind of a signal is incredibly data light. It's just a few bytes of information. And this is the thing that parents really want to know. They want to know if something's going down. And we also need to train both schools and parents as to what to do when that happens. But they also want to know when their child
Right,
is safe.
right. I just want to switch gears a little bit to get maybe more in the weeds, but talking on a more practical level about how to implement policies like this. Locally, Brockton High School just purchased Yonder pouches, and the kids just started using them in their first week of school. For anybody who doesn't know, Yonder pouches are these magnetic pouches. The kids walk into school, put their phone in it, and a teacher seals it, and it cannot be unsealed except for a device that a teacher has. Is that a good strategy? Or are you proposing kids leave the phones at home entirely?
It is, I think, at best a temporary strategy.
Okay.
Temporary in the sense of getting the schools and the students prepared or used to not having their phones. We did the school that we went to in Utah used Yonder pouches, and the kids hated them.
Okay.
Because of the way that it was implemented, it actually used up a lot of time to check in and check out at the beginning of the day. And they also felt they were checked up on during the day. More than a few of them talked about having scissors to cut the pouch. This school actually had a policy where seniors could go off campus to get lunch, and they felt vulnerable without their phones, being off campus. So they wish they'd had it for that. So I think that Yonder pouches are, as I say, a temporary solution to get the whole system used to not having the phones. But I think the ultimate goal will be for the young people to have the phones in their backpacks or their lockers, somewhere where they can use them, but that being supplemented by what happens in their own heads about when and where and for what the phones are to be used. So
Right. So the
that's
Yonder
why.
pouches are like training wheels.
Exactly, exactly. So I think that when we get to the point of realizing how to best preserve the educational opportunity that school represents, to better understand what kind of a school society we can build, I think that then we will hopefully get to a better place. There will always be bad actors. There will always be kids who want to beat the system, but we've got to move it from being the forbidden fruit to being something that they see limits them as opposed to gives them power, limits them in the ways that they want to achieve at school.
We have just a little bit of time left before we go. I want you to show us your book one more time and give us any
Okay.
final thoughts.
Okay, I will show it to you and I will tell you a couple of things. One is it is broken down into 3 sections. These are all based both in the science we do and in a lot of the clinical experience we've had. So there are lots of student and patient stories in there. Names are all changed, of course, but really in practical ways around the first part of the book, which is called What, which is how exactly does a screen interface with the growing child from infancy to early adulthood. The second part is so what? It approaches all the issues people are concerned about, like violence, like sex, like drugs, like all the various things, including the problematic interactive media use that occurs with gaming and social media sometimes. The third part is called Now What? What have we learned from the screens we've researched to date to help us deal with generative AI, to help us deal with the oncoming so-called metaverse of AR and VR life with the goggles. And then the fourth part is for those people who don't have the time or want to refresh themselves from the reading of the book, is called Ages and Stages, a digital wellness primer, which basically takes each stage of life from infancy right through to early adulthood and said, here's what the screens are, here's what the kids are doing, here are the positives and negatives of this. So my hope is that this will be kind of an owner's manual for your digital native.
Love it. Love it. Dr. Rich, Director of the Digital Wellness Lab at Children's. Thank you for your time. I'm sure people will be interested in this.